Picture an old man sitting in the shade outside his tent, surrounded by children who call him grandfather, and their children who also call him grandfather, and their children too. 7 generations, all alive at once, all gathered around the same man. The youngest ones have never known a world without him. The oldest ones remember him telling stories about a world 400 years gone, describing it the way you described last Tuesday. He has buried no children. He has barely begun to feel old. According to an ancient genealogy, that man's heart beat for 969 years before it finally stopped. Not decades, not centuries even, nearly 10 of them, one after another, inside the same body. His name was Methuselah, and he holds the longest recorded lifespan in the entire Hebrew Bible. Here's what should genuinely stop you. The very same text that records a life almost 1,000 years long turns around a few pages later and tells you that a human lifespan would be cut down to 70. 70 years, 80 if you're strong. A 90% collapse written by the same tradition about the same lineage of people. Something happened between Methuselah and you, and a story of what, exactly, is far stranger and far less settled than most retellings admit.
Start with the account itself starts. Genesis lists 10 generations from Adam to Noah, and almost every single one lives close to 900 years. Adam at 930, Seth at 912, Jared at 962, on and on, a drumbeat that never drops below 800. Then the pattern cracks. One man in that list, Enoch, isn't recorded as dying at all. The text says only that he walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. No death, a disappearance instead. And Enoch's son is Methuselah, the longest-lived man in the record, whose very name has been read by some scholars as carrying a grim double meaning tied to timing, though that reading is disputed, and it's worth being honest that it's one interpretation among several, not settled linguistic fact. Then comes the one verse in the entire account where a reason is actually given. Genesis 6:3. Humanity's days would be limited to 120 years. For the first time, after page of near 1,000-year lifespans, a number appears that looks like a boundary closing. Curiously, here's the part almost nobody tells you. Scholars have argued for centuries over what that verse even means. Is 120 years a countdown to judgment, a deadline before a coming flood? Or is it a brand new ceiling on human life itself? Both readings have serious ancient defenders, and the Hebrew grammar itself is genuinely ambiguous enough to support either.
The numbers that follow are what settle the argument, and this is where it gets fascinating. If 120 had been an instant new limit, you'd expect everyone after the flood to top out near that number immediately. Instead, Noah's son Shem lives 600 years. His son lives 438. The next, 433. We're still deep in the hundreds, nowhere near 120. What the record actually shows isn't a switch flipping, it's a slope, a gradual generational decline. And then abruptly, the slope breaks. From Eber's 464 years, his son Peleg drops to 239, cut almost exactly in half in a single generation, in the same passage that notes the earth was divided in his lifetime. Whatever that division means exactly, the timing lines up precisely with the sharpest fall in the entire genealogy. If this were a story invented on the spot, this is exactly the kind of subscribe-worthy detail worth sitting with. An instant decree produces a cut, not a curve. And what the text shows is unmistakably a curve. The decline continues without recovery. 239, 230, 148, until Abraham lives 175 years, his son Isaac 180, his grandson Jacob 147, and his great-grandson Joseph dies at 110. From roughly 930 to 110 in a matter of generations, and it still hasn't hit bottom. That happens later in a psalm attributed to Moses, the same man traditionally credited with recording Methuselah's 9 centuries, who wrote what may be the most quoted line about mortality in the entire Bible. The days of our years are 70, or 80 if we have the strength. The irony is almost unbearable. Moses himself is recorded at dying at exactly 120, the very number from that disputed verse, with, the text insists, his eyesight and strength completely intact.
Here's where the story widens beyond the Hebrew Bible entirely, and it should genuinely unsettle you. An ancient Mesopotamian document known as the Sumerian Ting List records rulers before a great flood reigning for absurd stretches of time. Tens of thousands of years, one king credited with 28,000 alone. Then a single line appears. The flood swept over the land, and immediately after, reign lengths collapse, generation after generation, until they settle into ordinary human timescales. 2 entirely separate ancient traditions, independently, describe the identical shape. Impossibly long lives before a flood that splits history in 2, and a steep decline into something recognizably human afterward. What actually caused that collapse is where the text itself goes completely silent, and where centuries of guesswork have rushed in. One popular theory proposed a canopy of water vapor shielding early Earth from aging radiation, collapsing into the flood itself. It's a tidy idea, and it was abandoned not by critics, but by the creationist scientists who originally proposed it, once the physics were run and the numbers showed such a canopy would have cooked the planet alive. Another theory, called genetic entropy, argues that harmful mutations compounded faster than natural selection could remove them, especially after the population bottleneck of just 8 survivors on the Ark. And while the resulting decline curve in the genealogy really does match the smooth shape of a genuine decay process, the theory itself is rejected by the mainstream genetics community. A third, more modest theory points to permission to eat meat and a newly seasonal climate after the flood. Plausible, but essentially unprovable from a text this old.
There's also a stranger possibility worth naming honestly, that these numbers may never have been meant as literal year counts at all. Ancient Egyptian texts held 110 as the ideal perfect age to die. And notably, both Joseph and Joshua, the 2 biblical figures most steeped in Egyptian culture, are recorded dying at exactly 110. The Hebrew ideal appears to have been 120, the same number in that disputed verse, the same number Moses reaches. Coincidence? Or a culturally symbolic marker of a full life rather than a literal calendar entry? Even the ancient manuscripts disagree with each other on several of these ages, which is a detail rarely mentioned and worth knowing regardless of where you land. What can actually be stated plainly, the text records a drastic decline, numbers you can graph directly. It offers exactly one theological reason for it, and it says absolutely nothing about the biological mechanism. That entire territory belongs to human theory, not scripture, and none of the competing explanations has been proven. Which brings the story back to Moses, a man who had Methuselah's 9 centuries in his own records and watched his own people die at 70 in the desert around him. He didn't write a lament about what was lost, he wrote a request instead, Meth of knowing. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Not a complaint about brevity, a claim that brevity itself is the lesson. Methuselah had nearly 1,000 years, and the record tells us almost nothing he did with them. You have, if you're fortunate, 70 or 80. The question worth sitting with isn't why the number fell. It's what you intend to do with the days you've actually been given, now that you know precisely how few of them there are.